Can I just say one thing firstly? I love the name Eat Sleep Boxing Repeat.
Welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Elliot and Danny. This is the big fight breakdown for the big fight taking place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia between up-and-coming prospect Moses Itauma against former world title challenger Dillian Whyte in a real crossroads fight that we're all really looking forward to, taking place on the 16th of August. If you enjoy this video and you are not subscribed to this channel already, please do so. Gents, good to be joined by both of you. Looking forward to getting stuck into this. Probably one of the biggest fights that's going to take place in what's a quiet month in August. Danny, I'll come to you first here. Dillian Whyte was once seen as by some as a top five heavyweight. Challenged Tyson Fury for the world title. He's beaten good names as well. Joseph Parker, Alexander Povetkin had that fight against Anthony Joshua a long time ago. Um, is he still a top 15 heavyweight in your opinion? He's been inactive, had that fight against Ebenezer Tete a few months ago now, but is he still in your top 15?
It's a difficult one because on resume, he's not suffered any losses that you would say put him out of that top 15. So if you're going off that alone, names they've fought, names they've beat, you do have to have him in there. Although he's not put in a performance of a top 15 heavyweight in a very long time. Now, we see fighters put in, lackluster performances against subpar opposition and then raise the levels. So I'm hesitant to completely banish him from my top 15 based off the back of it was a poor performance against Ebenezer Tete and sort of non-starter against Christian Hammer, who clearly didn't want to be in the ring. So he's not really had a meaningful fight since Jermaine Franklin, who himself is probably a fringe top 15, top 20 heavyweight, and Don White did beat him that night in a close competitive fight. So for me, he's still in there, although there are big question marks over what's left, and I'm sure we'll come on to that.
Yeah, and just like to add a bit of background towards that. Dillian Whyte, 37 years old now. Last meaningful win was against Jermaine Franklin, as you mentioned, Danny, which was November 2022. So it's been a while since he's kind of fought a top 15 heavyweight himself, and that win against Jermaine Franklin was contentious as well. Let's not forget that, a very, very close fight. Elliot, what about you? We talk about kind of top 10 heavyweights, top 15 heavyweights. Quite often, it's always a funny one with the heavyweight division because it feels like you've got a certified kind of four or five guys who are at the top, whether it be Usyk, Dubois, Fury, whether or not you count him as being retired. Ajit Cabello, you probably got to put him in there, but is Dillian Whyte in your top 15 at the moment?
Felt like I glitched then. I was going to say absolutely not, but I thought that was a bit strong. I think definitely, obviously not in the top 10. I did a bit of research for this actually beforehand, uncharacteristically so, and I pulled pulled 15 names together. But I was just looking at so WBO, for example, has Johnny Fisher at 15, but I was looking at that and going, would I have Dillian Whyte beating Johnny Fisher? Probably not. To be perfectly honest with you, I really wouldn't. I feel like if you didn't stop him like early, I think Johnny Fisher's just general conditioning would probably beat Dillian Whyte. I look at the IBF, sorry, Lawrence Okolie sitting at 15. Now, would he be him? No, no. So there we go. Like, I look at that. I think maybe could he burgle a position? Maybe he could burgle a position. Hasn't lost anyone in a while. Yes, I get that. But the names you mentioned, like Parker, I mean, probably wasn't even eating solid food by the time he was, when he challenged Joe Parker. That's how long ago that sort of run of Dillian Whyte seems to be. And you look at recently, like the Fury fight was terrible, terrible spectacle. Wasn't really competitive in that fight either, to be honest. Even though he was physically standing there. And then obviously since that break, Franklin, yeah, that's okay. But since then, he's the last time against Tet, he looked awful. So for me, I actually probably would urge against putting him in the top 15. But in many ways, I think for both men, which we'll kind of probably talk about in this video as well, is it's almost like we'll be able to calibrate where they both are actually off the back of this fight. Be able to probably get a better sense of where Otama is and a better sense of where Dillian Whyte is afterwards. But at the moment, for me, no, he wouldn't be in my top 15.
Right, a damning verdict from Elliot Grigg there. I think the thing is, from me, we saw Dillian Whyte in his last fight against Ebenezer Tete, who we've seen blasted out in a round by Fraser Clark, blasted out in a round by Daniel Dubois. And Dillian Whyte, look, he pretty much won every round and he got the stoppage eventually. But at times in there, the way he was fighting, it just looked a bit, I don't want to say life and death, but the way he was fighting, if he was to fight against anyone in the top 15, he would definitely lose. I just thought the way he was leading himself wide open in that fight against a young, very fast heavyweight in Moses Itauma, it's concerning ahead of this fight. Danny, I want to get your opinion on what Elliot said. Would Dillian Whyte lose to Johnny Fisher, in your opinion?
I think that's a bit strong, personally. I think we've not seen anything from Johnny Fisher to suggest that. And let's not forget Dillian Whyte, battered Dave Allen, who's obviously took Johnny Fisher apart. And I know there's a long time removed from that, but even if it is a faded Dillian Whyte, I think he would still have a bit too much for Johnny Fisher, in my opinion, at this stage.
I mean, it's a fight if Dillian Whyte loses against Moses Itauma, which if we're being honest, we're expected to, and Johnny Fisher kind of has a bit of a rebuild over a couple of fights, not a fight I would rule out. I'm sure it would kind of fill up the Copper Bosch. I'm not saying I want to see it, but I'm just saying it's maybe a fight that I can tell by Danny's face he's not very impressed, so we'll move on before he tells us off. Okay. Elliot, on Moses Itauma, I'm not sure what the radio coverage of his fights have been like for yourself over the last couple of years, but you can't deny you can't deny he's obviously he's been very impressive, hasn't he? We've seen him kind of fight Mike Ballaghan in Glasgow, blast him out in last time out on the Josh Taylor Esserman undercard. Still very young, but how good do you think he can be? And I'm talking, are we looking at someone who's going to be kind of is going to rule the heavyweight division for the next 10 years? We're going to look back on and be like, right, he was a pound for pound star at his peak. Are people getting carried away? I know it's tough because we haven't seen him fight a certain type of heavyweight yet, but looking at him, how good will Moses Itauma be?
Yeah, like you said, some of you guys have seen him, others of us have listened to him in action, and I think yeah, it's an interesting question because obviously he's so young. Again, I feel like, the win over sort of Dempsey McKean, obviously went those rounds with Hrgovic, looked impressive. I mean, Marius Watch is obviously, quite a lot older than obviously what you deem in his prime. But again, was almost like kind of like tough, durable opponent, big guy as well, that you kind of feel like is a sort of almost a benchmark of someone coming through, and obviously dispatched him in 2 rounds. So the signs are kind of good. I feel like for me, this fight again, I thought this fight for me will show more will give more hype possibly than an actual kind of credence. I do feel like Dillian Whyte is kind of that washed that I feel like it actually won't be too challenging. We don't want to give too many of my predictions away, but I feel like, yeah, if you look at maybe the heavyweight scene, I think people that are coming through, they're obviously still quite young. See, Daniel Dubois is still young himself, isn't he? So you could be looking at Daniel Dubois going, well, actually, could he dominate for the next sort of 5 to 10 years, or will he come across the town at some point? I feel like there's probably after this fight, you're looking at probably more established top 15 opponent before I can really sit there and say. I mean, he's been very impressive at this stage, but he's still very young also for a heavyweight. I would have quite liked to have seen in some ways, I know they'll probably protect him, I would probably quite like to have seen Turkey launch him in and try and go for Tyson's record, but that may have been, more kind of, for entertainment purposes rather than sort of good sort of boxing management. But I do think we're looking at someone who will be a future world champion. I can't necessarily say, he'll dominate the division because there's some other good names in there as well, but I do think he's definitely looking at a world champion. And I think, to be honest with you, the way things are going, you could probably arguably make a case for the next sort of couple of years, getting him in there for that. I think maybe building fight after this, top 10, maybe 1 or 2 in the top 10, then maybe even a title shot, depending on how Usyk goes and how the sort of belts fragment and that thing as well. So yeah, I do think definitely world champion in the future in waiting.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I think it would be interesting to see how quickly he is moved. He's been linked with some very big names. He's been linked with, I think, Martin Bakole. It's one he's been linked with. I know Billy Nelson's had a few things to say. But he is only 20 years old. But at the same time, you want someone who he is going to have more than 2, 3 rounds against. But and also, I don't think guys are queuing up to fight him. So it's a really difficult process. And unfortunately, we could have maybe periods of most of the time being a bit inactive because they can't get fights for him, or they can't get anyone that's going to take him past a couple of rounds. So it's going to be a really interesting couple of years, but hopefully an exciting couple of years. Danny, we weren't sitting too far away from each other where we last time out in Glasgow against Mike Ballaghan. How obviously it's all been very impressive, but is this guy going to rule the heavyweight division in the next 10 years? Is he going to be the #1 heavyweight in your opinion?
I mean, it would be an almighty shock if he didn't, at the very least, become world heavyweight champion. I don't think you'd find any anyone who's watched him at any sort of length who would say anything other than that's going to happen at 20. He's got a lifetime to achieve that. There are still question marks. We've never seen him hit clean on the chin. Billy Nelson, the aforementioned Billy Nelson, who's never shy in sharing a sparring story, says he's heard that there's vulnerabilities there. We don't know what Itauma's like in a tough fight that goes past the halfway stage. I think in some of his earlier fights when he wasn't getting the stoppage, he did look a bit disinterested. So maybe question marks over the mentality there. But in terms of offensively, he's got all the attributes. I mean, used to are a bit older than me, Elliot Grigg particularly, but I've never seen a heavyweight with that natural speed. Personally, I think when you look at heavyweights of his age, a bit older, that next generation, on the eye test again, there's not too many you'd look at who think can rival Moses in terms of skill and speed. And yeah, if there is going to be a heavyweight that takes that number one spot ahead of them, I don't see who they are now in and around his age. So everything looking very promising.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like this might be a bit of a controversial thing to say, but what heavyweights that are in their 20s now can you look at and be like, you are the future of the division? There are a couple, of course. Daniel Dubois is 27, but he's been around a while. I mean, Jalilov is a name, but I don't know if he's going to be the heavyweight people maybe expect him to be. It's been a bit straight at Jared Anderson as well. Is probably not going to be the heavyweight people expect him to be. And I'm sure there's other names people can come up with. I mean, Richard Torres Jr. looks quite impressive, but I wouldn't want to kind of guarantee anyone anything. Justice Hooney's just lost to Fabio Wardy recently. So my point is, I don't think there's a lot of heavyweights in waiting who are in between the ages of kind of 20 to 30 who you can really say you are going to be a future heavyweight world champion, in my opinion, apart from Moses Itauma. Danny, we'll stick with you for our next point. Moses Itauma, strong favourite for this fight against Dillian Whyte. If Dillian Whyte loses, do you think that is it, or do you think he will stick around for a few more fights? 37 years old now. I'll let you answer this question, and then I'll maybe give another question to you based on your answer.
I mean, when you're a heavyweight who's headline pay-per-views in the UK as the A side, it's never really it. You can go on as long as you want. There'll be a promoter who's willing to feed you to their prospect, put you in as the B side, put you in with a similar age, faded British fighter for a matchup that will generate interest. It's the nature of being a heavyweight, but I think that's why question marks and eyebrows were sort of raised when this fight was announced, because Dillian Whyte could have probably got a fight with a more established name, and then if you lose that, you can drop down to the Moses Itauma fight for maybe a bit less money than he's getting this time, but still a good payday. But if you lose here, I mean, that Anthony Joshua rematch is gone. The Derek Chisora trilogy potentially still there. The Joe Joyce fight, I mean, we'll talk about that now and think who wants to see that, but it would be a decent sized UK Saturday night headliner off pay-per-view. So I don't know whether he should go on if he loses this fight in conclusive fashion, which it feels like the majority of people are predicting he will, but there's always going to be options there. It's just how it is when you're a British heavyweight.
Yeah, and I feel quite strongly about this. I'm fairly confident that Dillian Whyte will carry on, unless he takes like a massive beating, which he could do. I think he will carry on because there are still big fights and big nights there for him. You mentioned them. I also think that if he can basically be part of what I'm going to call the Riyadh Season Club, which is kind of some fighters get invited back to Riyadh season events, and Dillian Whyte may hope to do that, which could mean a big purse as well. But we'll see. Elliot, give us your thoughts. Do you think that'll be it for Dillian Whyte if he loses? Do you think he'll carry on? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't really add too much, to be honest with you, on what Danny said there. I think he will carry on. I do believe that. I almost feel like the last couple of fights have been almost a kind of audition to try and get onto that kind of Riddier carousel. I think, like you mentioned, that he's going to kind of be an interesting fights, even if his contributions to those fights are laying on his back. So I feel like he will get the chances. Again, I'm not necessarily sure I want to see Joyce versus Whyte, frankly. I'm not entirely sure I'd want to see Chisora. I'd listen to Chisora. I'd catch myself from saying watching it. I would listen to it when it appeared on BBC 5 Live. Other stations are available. And I would, the Joshua fight, though, I do think, yeah, would surely be gone if he loses this. But then maybe you think if Joshua himself, I think, is kind of on the decline, maybe if there's any way of kind of selling that fight is keep Joshua active and sort of feed him someone while he hopes that, kind of Usyk goes into retirement or something. Maybe there's a possibility for that. But I don't think any of the fights would necessarily be the spectacle that obviously they once would have been. But I also agree with Danny that I think the opportunities will be there. And I can also see like the name being enough to carry him to at least another couple of fights after this, possibly on that Riddier carousel.
Yeah, I think that one name that I think will be mentioned is both you mentioned is Chisora. Chisora, we're being told, is going to have one more fight. I'm not quite convinced of that myself. I think Chisora will be, yeah, I think that's a fight he wants because it's a big fight. Chisora's kind of had ups and downs in his career. He's on and up at the moment. He's won his last two fights, being the underdog in both. So I think that's a possibility. Elliot, who would win that fight? Who would win that trilogy?
You know what? I'd probably lean towards Derek Chisora just because, obviously he's lost him already, hasn't he, a couple of times. But I just think when you look at Chisora of recent, I wasn't expecting, frankly, to beat Joe Joyce or Otto Wallin. But I almost feel like his kind of activity and conditioning in general, sort of like coming forward and like, style would probably get the better of Dillian Whyte. He could also be caught himself, don't get me wrong. We've seen him obviously stopped by Whyte before, but I just got a feeling that just the last version I saw of Dillian Whyte just didn't look like he would have enough to keep Chisora off him, frankly. And I just feel like it'd be kind of a tragic fight, but one I think they would expect Chisora to win.
Yeah, for sure. We shall see. Danny, would you agree like Dillian Whyte 2-0 against Chisora? One fight a late stoppage, one fight a very close contest. Who would you back to win that third fight?
Yeah, I'm really not sure because you look at Derek Chisora's last fights, and he's obviously not the same Derek Chisora from either of those Dylan White fights, but he's come pretty effective on the back foot. He slips and slides quite well. He doesn't maraud forward as he used to. He doesn't have the gas tank for it, and he's been active at a higher level than Dylan White. I really don't know. It's one, I guess, who lands first. I think you look at Chisora, and despite the fashion White knocked him out in, you would say his punch resistance maybe looks a bit better than Dylan White. So I would argue Dylan White probably a bigger puncher than Chisora. So probably it's just the case of who lands first. I don't think I have a prediction at this stage.
No, fair enough. I think I could definitely see it happening, by the way. I just think it's a final kind of cash grab from both, and also
Oh, it is.
I think the casual fan would love it. I think people would pay to see it. People still are paying money to go and see Derek Chisora. I think they would go and see Derek Chisora versus Dillian Whyte 100%. All right, chaps, we'll do predictions to end. Danny, I'll go to you first. Obviously, Itauma, the strong favorite for this fight. But what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think he's the strong favourite for good reason. I think he will win the fight. I think inactivity for an aging, faded fighter we've seen a lot in recent months is a killer. You look at Lee Wood, you look at Liam Smith, and when you're a heavyweight, a fairly slow heavyweight like Dylan White, inactivity going into a fight with someone with the speed and the sharpness of a Moses Itauma who's been active, who's so much fresher than anyone Dylan White's fought potentially ever. Certainly recently, I think it'll end pretty badly for Dylan White, to be honest. And if he makes it out of the first 3, 4 rounds, I would be surprised.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's a solid prediction. Elliot, what are you going for?
Yeah, I'm going for a Itauma stoppage. I think Dillian Whyte, I think, we've seen kind of the pace drop off Dillian Whyte even when he was kind of in his heyday towards the sort of stretch of fights as well, tend to sort of tire mid-range. I don't think it's going to go second half. I actually, to be honest with you, feel like with the Itaama's sort of power and speed and sort of age advantages, I actually feel like I feel like he could stick it on him genuinely in the first couple of rounds, and when he does start, I feel like White will go over. But I really do. I don't think the sort of resistance is there from White. I've seen White hurt frequently throughout his career. He's older now, like you say, he's been inactive as well. I just think it's going to be two rounds, 2 or 3, something like that. If the town especially turns up really motivated and wants to make a statement stoppage, I think he could do that. Frankly, really, really early a town stoppage.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'll join you, gents. I think that factor in this fight is a step up for Itauma. He's fought Dempsey McKean, Mike Ballaghan, Dillian Whyte. Once upon a time, would have kind of beaten those guys quite convincingly, in my opinion. And it's a case of kind of what does Dillian Whyte have left? And I think most people think perhaps not much. I also think at the same time, I think Itauma's team will just will kind of want him to maybe go into a bit deeper waters when it comes to the rounds. But I do agree with what Elliot said. I think if Itauma was told get rid of him in round one, I'm pretty sure he could do that. But I'm going to go for Itauma stoppage in round 3 or 4. I don't see it going any longer than that. But we'll see what happens. Look, should be an entertaining night, August the 16th. Yeah, looking forward to this one. Danny, Elliot, thank you both for joining me. We'll speak to you again soon.
There's all.
Thank you, mate. As always, guys, thank you very much for watching.